After dragging himself back to shelter, Karath collapsed into sleep when his body could no longer resist exhaustion. It was not true sleep, only a moment where consciousness let go, slipping into a shallow, flickering darkness where every sense remained half open, like wounds that had not yet closed. His back pressed against the cold ground, the stench of death still clinging to his skin and armor, heavy enough to feel as though it had soaked into his blood. His breathing was uneven, each breath short and shallow, as if drawing in too deeply would cause the world around him to surge inward. This had never happened before. A Yacha does not sleep in fear. A warrior does not allow himself to sink while no watch is set, no perimeter secured, no hand resting on a weapon. Yet Karath had done all of that and still slept. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he did not dream of victories. He saw no marked skulls of honor, no record boards, no approving roars of his clan. He dreamed of being torn apart, not once, but again and again. He saw himself running, legs heavy as lead, the ground gripping his feet. He saw shapeless forms rushing in from every direction. He saw jaws, claws, crushing weight collapsing his chest. Each time he jolted awake, his throat burned dry, his hands clenched around empty air, claws scraping at the dirt as if trying to hold on to something that still existed. When dawn began to break, Karath sat up. There was no sound around him, yet the sensation of being watched remained, clinging like a second skin. He inhaled slowly, deliberately, forcing his heart rate back into a range he could control, then looked down at himself. Scratched armor, torn flesh, the stench still lingering. A truth surfaced, clear and merciless. He whispered it in his throat, soundless, like a confession that would be crushed by honor if spoken aloud. He was no longer the one who ruled this place. There was no eruption of rage, only a cold, hollow opening within him where old doctrines could no longer find purchase. Karath did not die from the thought, but he felt something, part of himself, or more precisely, part of what it meant to be Yautja, break apart. And then what remained began to adapt. Karath rose slowly, allowing his body to reacquaint itself with its own weight. He glanced toward his hip, where his technological tools still hung, silent, heavy, like useless ornaments. Karath turned back to what lay scattered around him. Bones of Zernath, long, curved, hard but not brittle. Teeth of Varkul, sharp, resilient under pressure. The thick hides of four-legged beasts, non-reflective to energy, durable, and low in scent. He began to work. Without haste, Karath used his claws to separate joints, breaking along natural angles to preserve structural integrity. He ground bone tips against stone until they were sharp enough to pierce flesh, then bound them to dried sinew with simple knots. Not elegant, but strong. Rows of teeth were aligned and fixed onto leather cords, forming crude clamp traps placed along narrow passages between rocks and roots. He dug shallow pits, covered them with thin layers of soil, and planted sharpened bones at the bottom. Not enough to kill, but enough to slow, to force prey to stop exactly where he wanted. Karath stepped back a few paces, observing what he had made. A fleeting thought, unpleasant yet undeniable, slipped into his mind. These methods were no different from how the creatures of this planet hunted him. Karath stood still for a long moment, allowing the thought to settle. He was no longer a hunter entering the battlefield with absolute advantage. He was learning how to become part of the hunt itself, like prey. But perhaps on this world, only those who accepted that truth had any chance of surviving.